ARE Podcast, episode number 16.
Welcome to the ARE Podcast. Where it's all about encouraging and inspiring you today so you can fulfill your dream of becoming a licensed architect tomorrow. And now your host. His Starbucks order is grande latte, non-fat, no foam, heated to 180 degrees. David Doucette.
Hello, and welcome back to another action-packed episode of the ARE Podcast. We have a great show today. We're going to talk to Charlie, who is taking the exam over the course of 7 days, all 7 divisions. So we're going to hear all about that in a second. Before I bring you on, Charlie, just really quick, let's see.
And now, NCARB News.
Our quick NCARB news today is the IDP streamline goes into effect on July 1st, so they are no longer requiring the elective hours. This is actually a huge deal. Drops it down from about 5,600 down to 3,740. We'll have more information, hopefully actually get somebody from NCARB on the show to discuss that. But of course, check with your own state jurisdiction, because that's who's going to have the final call there and how they're doing that. So, with that said, Charlie Kletcha is joining us you're in D.C., right?
I am. I'm actually out in Annapolis at home today.
Oh, cool. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Excited to find out why you're doing what you're doing, what's motivating for you to do this. And you're essentially doing the 7 and 7 campaign. You've been blogging about this, and you're also president of the AIAS. So for starters, how did you become president of the AIAS?
Well, I did a 3-year master's degree in Chicago. Actually, my undergrad was actually in theater, in lighting design and stage management. So when I got into my master's program, was sort of dragged into the organization is maybe not the most flattering word, but had an upperclassman strongly encourage me to join. And it was actually that first year and a half I was involved, but not terribly active. And about halfway through, a year and a half into my graduate program, I attended the national convention for the first time for the AIAS, which is over New Year's every year. And it was my first exposure to the organization outside of my own chapter. Kind of a light bulb moment for me. I sort of understood the importance and the power of being involved in something like that. So I decided that at the next convention I would run for office, but because that would be in my last year, my only option was the 2 positions that take office after graduation, which are president and vice president. And after some long and difficult conversations with some trusted mentors, I was encouraged to run for president. And so at the 2013 conference in Chicago, our elections happened all over the course of that conference. So it was 4 straight days of speeches and Q&As and glad-handing the membership and just getting to know as many people as I could. And election happens on the last day, and that's when I found out. So I had about a 6-month transition when I was kind of coming up to speed on what this position entails, and also on the search committee to hire a new executive director, plus that whole finishing grad school thing.
So to become president or vice president of the AIAS, you actually have to be out of school.
Yeah, you run in your last year of school, so it would be the New Year's of your final year, and then we take office in July. So I graduated in May. My wife and I moved to Detroit, and then 2 weeks later I moved to D.C. And we overlap for a month with the outgoing. So actually coming up in this July, I'll be out at the end of July, but my successor will start at the beginning of July. So we have some transition period, and we work together to plan our summer leadership conference, which is in D.C.
So are you feeling akin to Kevin Spacey in House of Cards? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, a little bit, Trying to cope.
Very cool. So, and are you're working in an architecture firm now, correct?
No, the officer positions are actually full-time.
Are they really?
Yeah, we are full-time salaried employees of the organization. It's a very unique setup, and comes with its own interesting challenges. So I, as chairman of the board, employ the executive director, but he, as the head of operations and staff, implements office policies that I abide by. So it's a very interesting dynamic, but it's a fantastic opportunity for someone right out of school to really immediately be engaged at the national level in some very high-level conversations. I sit at the same table with the president and executive director of the AIA, of NCARB, ACSA, and NAB. That's what we call the Five Presidents Council. So it's really kind of being thrown into the deep end and taking a big role right away.
Wow, that is really cool because obviously learning how to work with people and deal with people and listen to people and manage people, it's a skill that can transition to sort of any profession. So you're thrown right into that then. Oh
yeah, absolutely. We're developing and implementing a multi-million-dollar budget. We're running membership and all kinds of data handling, national initiatives and programs, and then pretty extensive engagement with the other organizations. So I'm on the AIA board of directors, kind of by virtue of my position. Our vice president sits on the ACSA board. We sit on countless committees across those organizations. There seems to be a very rapidly growing interest in the perspective of kind of our generation. So we're very often invited to sort of lend that perspective in all kinds of different venues.
That's very cool. Are you, as president, is most of your work sort of in the office, or is most of it sort of out and about, spreading awareness?
Right. It's a lot of travel. I actually crunched the numbers, and 125 days of my term were on the road, or will have been on the road.
Wow.
So it's a lot of chapter outreach, a lot of attending both our conventions and other organizations. So next week I'll be down in Atlanta for the AIA convention. A couple weeks after that I'll be in New Orleans for the NCARB annual meeting. So we try and have a presence for the organization in as many places as possible, and a lot of chapter outreach as well. We try and at least every few years one of the officers will try to visit every chapter in the organization.
And how long is your term for?
It's a 13-month term.
Okay.
So like I said, we have that one month overlap. So we start beginning of July and run through the end of the following July. There is the option for the vice president to run for president and basically carry on to a 2-year term. But as far as I know, that's never happened.
Okay. So are you in the re-election? Are you in your re-election campaign right now?
No, I am not. I honestly, if I had known about that loophole when I was considering which position to run for, I might have. But I think my wife would be pretty upset for me leaving her for DC for 2 years straight. So I'm excited to get back home and start the career in Detroit.
Very cool. So now let's talk about this 7-and-7 campaign. Which you're taking all 7 divisions over the course of 7 days, yep. And which is pretty cool. It's obviously crazy, but as you and I were talking about, before we hit the record button, as the elders have reminded you, you're not kind of doing anything that they hadn't done before, I guess. What have they said? What have they said to you?
I very often get the response that 7 days is not that impressive, as they used to do it in 4 days, or 3, depending on who you ask. And that's something that when I learned that, I was like, oh, that seems a lot easier to just do it all in one go. And I don't think a lot of students or young professionals today necessarily have that sort of mentality. So I think there were a lot of benefits of that setup. Firms would know that all of their interns who were kind of on that path would be ramping up at the same time. There's a lot of camaraderie around it.
Right.
And however noble the intentions of making the exam more flexible by making it, take any time you want, take them all separately. The statistics on how vastly that increased the average time to licensure was really one of the big motivators for me wanting to promote at least getting started early. I'm not necessarily advocating that anyone else take them back to back like I am, but the entire point of the campaign is really to promote this scholarship fund, the AIS Professional Advancement Support Scholarship, which encourages our graduates of the AIS to take at least one exam within a year of graduating, just to really get started.
Because that seems to be the biggest hurdle, I think, for a lot of candidates is getting started. And no matter how we kind of approach this ARE process, it's kind of a lonely process. And like you mentioned, back, it was 98, I think, was about the first year it transitioned to computer-based, because that's when I took it first. Before that, it was 3 or 4 days, twice a year. And everybody geared up for it. So there was that sense of camaraderie. There was that sense, hey, we're all in this together. It's harder to get that now because we can take it anytime we want. And it's so easy to put it off. And then a couple of years goes by and you don't even know where time went and you haven't taken one exam. So you're trying to raise awareness, inspire people to just get in there and take it. What's been the factor for you that all of a sudden, like, what have you been doing, I guess, the last couple of years when you didn't take it? Or when were you first eligible to take it?
Well, I just graduated last May, so I've only been eligible for about a year. Okay. Based on the NAB requirement. And to be honest, part of what makes me feel so well equipped to talk about this issue of licensure is that when I started grad school, even though I was in a NAB accredited program, I had absolutely no intention of becoming licensed. My background in theater, I intended to study architecture and then go on to architectural lighting design and performing arts consulting, and actually had an internship with a firm that does both of those things. And really being involved with the AIS and the AIA was kind of what convinced me that licensure was something I wanted, regardless of whether or not I ever do traditional practice. It was sort of this mentality that I just spent 3 years going through hell to get through a master's degree. Why would I stop halfway through and not just go the rest of the way when I'm still kind of in that mental mode?
I think that's a great point, because the hard work is behind us at that point, architecture school, how many ever years we spent doing that. And I have a lot of friends from architecture school back in the day who didn't get licensed. And I think to your point, it's like, even if you don't plan to seek work in an architectural firm, you should at least just get your license just to kind of complete that goal. And it's easier to do in your 20s. It's harder to do in your 30s and 40s. And just do it. And I'm glad you're doing it and you realize that even if you're not going to work in a firm, it's like, hey, I should at least be a licensed architect, because it gives me more options in the future. Yeah,
exactly. It'll never be easier than right after school to get started. And that's, I think, some of the things that often we allow ourselves to use as excuses are the financial burden. So when you're an entry-level architectural intern, and maybe those student loans start coming due, justifying the cost of it's difficult, which is why we wanted to do this scholarship fund. And then access to information. There's just so much out there right now, and it's so hard to know, what's changed or what's current. And so really this 7 and 7 campaign and the blogging I've been doing is an attempt to try and, filter what's out there and provide some help with the informational side of things.
And I think more importantly, in all of this, it's like you're just jumping in and you're doing it. And I tell people this. I also teach candidates who want to get licensed in California, because after you take your 7 AREs, California's like, well, that's not good enough because we're California. You have to take this other exam. And that's the excuse I hear a lot is people keep putting it off. They'll buy the material. A year and a half later, they'll email me and, hey, there are any updates? I haven't taken the exam yet. And it's just, you just take it, and that's what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. That was one of the best pieces of advice I heard. It was actually a former professor of mine who's now working with Black Spectacles to do a video series on ARE prep. His advice was, the best way to study for the exam is to take the exam. Yeah. He said, if you can afford to do it, just put the $210 down, schedule whichever exam you feel the most reasonably confident in. Don't study for it at all. Just go in and take it just so you get used to the process. And then, worst case scenario is, yeah, you fail, but now you know what it's like to walk into a test center and get fingerprinted and all that stuff, and you're not stressing out about it. And the best case scenario is you pass one of 7 exams without studying for it, which is entirely possible.
It's entirely possible. And the thing is, too, is if you're not taking the exam, you have no chance of passing. If you're not in the game, you're not going to pass. So just get in the game. with sort of realistic expectations. And I think the biggest thing NCARB has done over the last several years is reduce the 6-month wait period down to 60 days. That's huge, because 60 days is, you could study other exams and go back and take the one you did. To me, that's the game changer. Yeah, absolutely. And it's unrealistic to think that if you had to wait 6 months, that you're going to maintain that momentum. You're obviously, whether it's focusing on other exams or just kind of taking a step back from it, over 6 months, you're going to forget a lot of what you learned leading up to the first exam. So 60 days really, I think, allows you to kind of keep that momentum going to a certain degree. And it still gives you enough time to make sure you're studying what you missed and all that. But yeah, I think that's a big change. I think it's a big change, and since the exam was computer based in '98, it's been 6 months. So it's taken many years for NCARB to figure that out. But you're exactly right. It took me 7 years. This was before the 5-year rolling clock. I took my first exam, programming, didn't pass, took the wind out of my sails. Didn't take another one for a couple years, and so it was this sort of on and off start, and a lot of it was that 6-month wait period, because it's a drag. But with the way the process is now, is if you don't pass one, focus on the other ones, and your 60 days is going to be here before you know it, and the material's somewhat fresh.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about the 7 and 7. You are getting ready to do this. When are you taking your first exam?
May 27th, so less than 3 weeks now. Coming right up.
And what day is that?
It's a Wednesday. So it's 7 business days. There's a weekend in the middle, but I do BS, BDCS, and SPD the first week.
Okay.
And then the remaining 4 Monday through Thursday the following week.
And what are your expectations of scores when you're through this?
I think the majority would be a win for me. If I passed 4 out of 7, I'd be happy.
Okay.
5 out of 7, I'd be like arms up in the air, victory lap.
Right.
6, I think, would be a little frustrating, just because I was 1 away. That would be a bit of a tease. But Frank, I could pass 0. It's. I hope that's not the case, and I don't expect it to be. But
right.
Frankly, I've never worked in an architectural firm, which is a significant factor on some of them.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So it really comes down to how I'm studying and what I'm studying and what I'm preparing with. Frankly, I think the biggest thing that I've been trying to remind myself is that I've committed to this, and it's going to happen one way or another, and kind of keeping a mantra of staying calm about it. My goal is to, in that last few days leading up to it, to be able to just look over a few things and review, but walk into that first test not stressing out and just knowing that whatever happens is going to happen, and we'll see how it goes from there.
Well, it's funny, when I do the CSE seminars, I tell people, because at that point they're one test away. They've been through the AREs, and for many of them, if they started in California, this is their first license. And I tell them, to be calm and relaxed as you can on exam day. And I do tell them, at the end of the day, it's just a test, and we don't want to minimize, this is a big goal. It's a big deal for us to finally get our license. But on the flip side of that, it's just a test. And at the end of the day, pass or fail, our friends are still going to love us. Our family's still going to love us. So, and I break the news to them. I say, I'll tell you guys now that when you pass the exam, nothing changes. Riches don't fall from the sky the next day. Clients don't start banging down your door the next day. It's just business as usual, because I think we get so worked up, if I could just pass, if I could just get my license, everything's going to change. It's not, it takes a little while,
And frankly, that's one of the funny things I kind of realized a little ways into planning this whole thing is, even if I passed all 7 on the first go, which would be, a phenomenal thing in terms of pushing my career forward, I'm still not going to be licensed. I still have 2 years of IDP to complete. So that's it might be a little bit anticlimactic if I'm just running out the clock, sitting at a desk, in a firm 2 years later, and it's it's Friday, you're licensed.
Right. So the state, so are you getting licensed in, which state are you getting? Michigan. Okay. And they allow the concurrent IDP, which I think is fantastic, because it didn't used to be like that. when I was. And I know not every state is there yet, but I think that's great because you're still in school, you're finishing school, you're in that mode, you're in that mindset. And it sounds like it is NCARB's push to help people stay motivated so they get licensed.
Yep.
And take the exams. Because I imagine over the years, NCARB has probably noticed people who will take a couple exams, not pass, and then they just disappear.
Yeah.
It's hard to keep motivated.
Mm-hmm.
So then when did you start studying?
Frankly, it was not far out from the... so I started this whole kind of blog campaign and things 7 weeks out from the day of my first exam. It was not long before that before I started really preparing. I was kind of gathering resources and kind of identifying strategy and things, but I really didn't start digging in and studying hardcore and really contributing time to it in a significant way until pretty much that seven week mark. So it's going to be an interesting assessment of the sort of tools I'm using to see how well that goes.
And what was the, I guess, the main inspiration or the main motivation where you woke up one day and said, "Hey, I'm going to do the 7 and 7 thing"?
It actually started as a joke between myself and my executive director. Our executive director is Nick Surface. He was actually employed by NCARB for about 6 years before that as one of their outreach and education and internship folks. So he had actually spent a lot of time traveling around to AIS chapters and to schools and AIA components talking about the process. So he brought a lot of knowledge kind of into the office in talking about how to promote, early advancement. And we were talking about something that the AIA and NCARB put on called the IDP Firm Award, which has a list of criteria that demonstrate that you are supportive of interns. So providing study materials, providing opportunities for getting broad IDP. But one of the criteria was, do you pay for your interns to take the exam? And so I kind of made a wisecrack to Nick and said, if we're promoting this to firms, then we should put our money where our mouth is, and you should pay for me to take the exam because I work here full time.
That was your joke, right?
And he came back with the witty retort that, like, okay, if you take them all in a week, I'll pay for them. And so that kind of started the idea. I was like, what if I did take them all in 7 days? And
right.
The financial motivation was not really part of the conversation at that point. It was just this idea of what if I did this campaign? Because at that point, we were already talking about the scholarship fund and, how can we get the word out about this? How can we generate some buzz? And so when that idea came out of taking all 7 in a week, it was like, well, yeah, why not? Let's do that. And
it is, I think it's obviously presented a challenge for you, and that's like, okay, I'm going to do it. Like that was your motivation. And that would, be my advice for anybody that is kind of, I guess, unmotivated or looking for motivation is just put the challenge out. It doesn't have to be 7 and 7, but one every 2 weeks or one every 3 weeks, whatever you can do to just to get the motivation and just keep taking them. And eventually you're going to pass them. Eventually you're going to get there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
I will say you have to want it. It is a big commitment, and it means making sacrifices. Saying no to happy hour and going home and studying and putting it in front of other things. But it's also, as much as it is mentally taxing to really be kind of digging in at this level, especially taking 7. It's also a really kind of rewarding and inspiring feeling to be taking this on. It's like climbing a mountain. I know that the peak is just a little ways away, and I'm almost there.
It's setting a goal, and it's setting a challenging goal, and working towards it. And I think that's satisfying in sort of whatever aspect we do in our lives. And it's much easier in your 20s to do this. And I see it all the time with people taking the CSE. I would say the average age is probably late 30s, early 40-ish, because some people just put it off for years, or they finish the AREs and they lose motivation and don't take the CSE because it's a pretty difficult exam. But I think people struggle over the years of not reaching their goal. Like it bothers them that they haven't completed this process. And as you get older, it bothers you more.
Yeah.
And so, just knock it out. The earlier you can, just knock it out, because you'll be, even if you never use your license again, it's a goal, you've achieved your goal.
Absolutely.
And then, Okay, so you got the 7 and 7. Now tell me about the campaign scholarship, which was, I guess, the genesis of the 7 and 7.
Yeah, so it's been my goal basically for my entire year to help bring the organization back into touch with its role in kind of leadership development and professional development. It's far too common for our organization to be kind of pigeonholed as a social organization, and we do throw good parties, but at the end of the day, we do a great deal of leadership experience training and professional development. One of the biggest things we provide is an opportunity to develop a professional network, not only among kind of your peers that are coming into the profession at the same time, but really through our relationships with the AIA and NCARB, you really build a huge professional network. And that whole "it's all about who you know" thing goes a long way in getting that first job. Just knowing who to talk to, having peers to bounce things off of. So the scholarship was conceived as a way to offset that financial burden of taking those first few exams. So it's in the fundraising phase right now. We have an Indiegogo campaign up trying to raise some money for it. And the way it'll work is anyone who donates $210 or more will get matched up directly with the recipient of the scholarship, and where possible, be aligned geographically. And that way the recipient of the scholarship can provide some feedback on how they're doing through the process, and hopefully we build some of these sort of organic mentorship relationships that are so common in our organization and are so fruitful. So the recipients of the scholarship, essentially, if they take the test within a year of graduating and pass that exam, they basically submit that pass in a short essay and get their $210 back.
Oh, that's very cool. So that's how, and this is on Indiegogo.
Indiegogo, yeah.
And if we search for it, how do we find it?
It's actually, you can go to aias.org/pass. We'll redirect straight to the campaign site.
Perfect. So that's aia.org/pass.
AIAS.org.
Sorry, right? AIAS.
You get that a lot.
You do, right? .org/pass. So AIAS.org/pass. So the idea is to help offset some of the costs that these interns may have. So after they pass an exam, they can submit the pass letter and I guess whatever fee or whatever to you guys, or write a letter. That's a pass letter and some short essay.
Yep. Yeah, basically the first year of the campaign is a bit of an experiment, both in how much money we're able to raise and how many people apply for it. We graduate about 1,000 students a year from our organization.
Okay.
So it'll be a bit of a test to see how many people are going to kind of step up to this challenge. So we definitely don't want to overextend ourselves and promise anyone can get it. So we want to have some sort of subjective criteria. So if we do get a huge response, we don't end up spending ourselves into a hole.
Right. And actually, that would be a good problem to have. I mean, just if you had a huge, that means a lot of people are taking the exam, a lot of people are moving forward. So is the way it's set up now? Is it one reimbursement per person, or can somebody get reimbursed multiple times?
I think for the first year, that'll be sort of the working assumption. Again, we can kind of play it by ear when that kind of first wave of applicants comes in. So we'll start accepting applications. It's expected late summer, early fall.
Okay.
So it'll essentially be targeted at those graduating right about now.
Okay.
So those who start testing over the summer can apply. If we see that the numbers are low, but we have some people who are applying for multiple, then great. But ultimately, the hope is to reach more people.
Right.
We're kind of similar to an AIA-backed scholarship called the Pettigrew Scholarship, except that one is a smaller pool of recipients, and they get all 7 exams paid for, as well as some study materials. But we're really more interested in quantity. We want lots of people to start testing.
Exactly.
So it's not necessarily about motivating people to take multiple back-to-back or make huge progress, but motivating lots of people to take that first step.
Which I think is kind of cool. As the recipient, you become sort of part of this movement. And, I guess just frankly off the top of my head, if I'm thinking about taking the exam or going to be, and if sort of saving the $210 is my motivating factor, I think that's great. But if that's your motivating factor, you're probably going to be disappointed during this process. Like you said earlier, like you got to find why you're doing this. You got to find your why. You know, what's motivating you.
Absolutely, and I've said that before, just about taking on the licensure process in general. After going through grad school, if I ever let the difficulty or the cost of anything stop me from getting what I wanted, I never would have gotten where I am now, and I probably never would have taken on grad school to begin with. So that's really not enough of a reason for me to stop, and it only is if you let it.
No, it's not, and you did mention this earlier about the cost. I'm glad we're going back to this because obviously we got to buy prep materials, we got to pay for the exam, we got to pay NCARB. There's a lot of people to pay, and we can use those as excuses for reasons not to take the exam because they're pretty good. It's like, hey, it's going to cost me a couple $1,000. I'm not going to take it, or we could say, okay, it's going to cost me a couple $1,000. I'm going to find a way to make this happen, and I'm going to achieve my goal. And it's mindset at that point. So people who think it's about the money, it's not the money. It's their excuses that they're building up, themselves.
Absolutely. Yep.
So then you have the AIA convention next week. What's going on there?
All kinds of good stuff. We're actually, the AIS is leading 3 different sessions. One that I'm leading is it's called View from the Backseat, Student Perspectives on Contemporary Issues, where I'm basically going to take on, a panel that I've assembled is going to take on 5 or 6 of the most controversial and divisive issues floating around the profession today, and we're going to openly debate them and kind of provide a summary of how we see our generation's thoughts on those issues manifesting. There's another session on studio culture and how that impacts firm culture in the profession. And then the last is being led by our current vice president. It's titled Kanye Architecture Just West of Insanity. And I think the title alone is intriguing enough. I'm not going to spoil what that one's about. You'll just have to show up and see.
Yeah, exactly. Are you on any of the panels?
I'm moderating the panel, the first one, the View from the Backseat.
Okay.
And I think I will be at the studio culture one. I have a lot of obligations at convention by virtue of being an AIA board member.
Right.
We have meetings starting Tuesday and Wednesday, and then all kinds of supplemental meetings and receptions and things like that.
So if somebody listening wants to come find you at the convention, what's the best place to find you?
Well, the sessions are in the schedule. We are EV 207, 307, and I think it's called SA 101 are our 3 sessions. You can find them all in the schedule. We also have a presence on the expo floor along with the AIA Center for Emerging Professionals. That's booth 1545. It is, I think, vaguely being called the blank canvas space. So it's kind of all white, and we're encouraging folks to come sort of leave their mark, leave messages, and sort of participate with us in a sort of creative exercises. We have all kinds of fun participants. I think there's an aerialist coming in and doing a display at some point in there. There's all kinds of fun things going on.
And what's entailed with somebody? Well, actually, let's talk about this. The AIAS. What's entailed? Somebody wanting to get involved. You obviously don't need to be a graduate of architecture school yet, correct?
Correct.
And what is the reason, if I'm sitting here, I haven't graduated yet, I'm going to be maybe taking the exam soon, what's the benefit to me if of joining the AIAS?
Well, so some of it we've kind of touched on already. A lot of it is sort of intangible things like building a strong professional network and leadership experience. So we have about 160 chapters across the country and a growing handful internationally. Including the 5 in the Middle East right now. And the students who sit on those local boards of directors gain some really invaluable experience they write their own budgets, they're planning meetings and developing programming. But for the general membership, it's opportunities for supplemental education. So we try wherever possible to provide information and resources that we see as commonly missing in educational programs. So a lot of students talk about the lack of sort of business experience and training in school, so we try and put them in touch with folks like the SDA, the Society for Design Administrators, who do webinars and courses on the business of running a small firm. We have our annual conference at the end of this year is in San Francisco, and we're going to have a ton of programming on sort of entrepreneurialism and startup culture. It is to some extent a social community, especially for someone who's just entering undergrad and is really getting used to college life in general for the first time. It provides sort of a peer network, not only locally at your own school, but across the country. The leadership development is huge in terms of kind of outside of our own organization, the opportunities to get involved with, being a student director on an AIA component board, becoming a student architect licensing advisor with NCARB. You can actually apply to be that, and they fly you out to their annual conference and give you all the tools to be sort of a student expert on licensing. Sitting on NAB visiting teams, members of the AIS can participate in NAB visits. I was actually just this fall out in Turkey at Istanbul Technical University for a substantial equivalency visit.
Oh, that's cool.
Mm.
So, like, I guess many things in life, right, there's a lot of opportunities open to us, and it's a matter of what we take. I would say, as sort of somebody who's hired employees in the past, and as a way, I think as young interns, we're always trying to differentiate ourselves or make ourselves stand out, because it does sound like the economy has picked up. It does sound like architects are hiring again. Mm-hmm. As an employer, we've talked about this before on previous episodes of the podcast. An intern is not going to get hired to be Joe Designer. It's just not how it works. You got to pay your dues. Mm. But as an employer, if there's a resume that came across my desk, obviously the interview is a whole nother process. But if somebody was involved in the AIAS in some sort of leadership role, that would immediately, it would stand out, and it would say to me, okay, this person's motivated, they like challenges, they know how to work with people. So that's definitely a plus. And I'm sure as you're learning now, you're learning a life skill, managing all kinds of different people, personalities. That's all part of it. It's not just about drawing elevations and stuff. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's that's exactly what we'd like to see is for the AIS, for that, if that shows up on your resume, for that to really be seen as something, meaningful, like you said, a differentiator, that, when graduating with a whole class of, NAB accredited degree holders, this gives you that little extra, yes, I fulfilled the minimum requirements of a NAB degree, but I also planned a community service project and have this leadership experience and can write a budget and understand these other kind of facets of the practice. Yeah, that's a good point, because, the portfolio obviously helps. We need a good portfolio, but, we could just assume everybody's got a great portfolio, and that's not going to be sort of a big topic of conversation in the interview. It's about you. What are you doing? What are your goals? Are you motivated? And if you're taking action and you're sort of taking advantage of these opportunities like the ones we're talking about, an employer, that's a plus for an employer. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. All right, so when are you flying out to it's Atlanta, Sunday. Right? Sunday. Yep. And are you going to be trying to be studying next week, or is it just a wash? I'm going to try. I'm going to do my best. My schedule is pretty jam-packed, so we'll see how much I can fit in. Maybe I'll put the podcast on while I'm sleeping and just listen. Yeah, exactly. Just let it subconsciously sink in. Repetition. Mm-hmm. And then, okay, so what's the day of your last exam? My last exam is June 4th. Okay. I have a job interview on June 5th, and then June 6th I fly to Mexico for a week, which was totally unintentional. I had planned that vacation before this whole 7-7 thing, but it's a very nice way to try and convince myself not to think about the results. And then I think the results are coming pretty quickly these days. Matter of a few days, it sounds like. Yeah, I think official is like a week and a half to 2.5 weeks. Okay. If things actually work out, after I come back from Mexico, I'll actually be going straight to the NCARB annual meeting, and I may actually receive all of my results at the NCARB annual meeting, which could be either a great ego boost if I do well, or potentially the most humiliating place to receive 1 out of 7. Exactly. Alrighty. Is there anything else you want to discuss, or anything we didn't mention? Not that I can think of. Let me ask you, donating to the campaign, how do people do that again?
So it's the Indiegogo site, it's ais.org/pass. There are several tiers. We're encouraging not only individual professionals and educators, but also things like AIA components, firms, other organizations. I've talked to a couple executives at AIA components who have said they have scholarship funds set aside, but that they just don't have enough students in their region to apply for it, and so it sits unused. So we're really trying to do some outreach there and encourage them to become kind of higher level backers, and that way we can kind of funnel people in their general area to say, hey, all of your scholarships came from this component.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Very cool. Well, I'm excited to talk to you when you get back from Mexico. Maybe. You might not want to talk to anybody when you come back.
Yeah, maybe I'll just find a Wi-Fi and then check my email and then just stay in Mexico. Maybe I'll just...
We'll hear from you like a year from now and be like, oh, yeah, I finally got through all the exams. It took a little while, but...
Yeah, I'm excited to have it done. It should be an interesting experience.
Cool. Well, Charlie, thank you so much. Good luck next week with the convention. Good luck with 7 and 7, and we'll have you on for the results.
Absolutely. My pleasure, and thanks for having me on.
Sure.
Thanks for listening to the ARE Podcast. Be sure to visit architectexamprep.com and check out our other podcast episodes, video tips, and the ARE